Hello, my name is Scott Leff. I am a senior at Connecticut College, and I am majoring in dance and a scholar in the Ammerman Center for Arts and Technology. And this year, I decided to complete an honors thesis in dance entitled Resequenced, a multimedia dance theater experience.
Hi, I'm Madeline Bank. I'm an art history and dance double major, and I'm in the Museum Studies certificate program. I'm a senior at Connecticut College, and this year I did an honors thesis entitled The Female Body, Myth and Sexual Power, Women in the Italian Renaissance. So Scott, I have seen you in person quite a bit, but now you're in quarantine. Where are you broadcasting from?
I am currently broadcasting from New York. And you?
Oakland, California, so pretty far away, but it's nice to see you at least virtually, if not in person.
Thank goodness for digital technology, where I can still feel some sort of connection to the people who are important to me.
Yeah, no, it's been really nice. How have you been holding up in quarantine?
I mean, I'm holding up about as well as one can be for a senior in college who will not be finishing their senior year, but I know I'm keeping perspective. I don't think my family has spent this much time together, the five of us, since probably my brother left for college. And it's just nice for us all to be living under one roof and sharing all our meals together. How about you, Maddie?
Yeah, I've had the same, definitely deeper connections with family than before. Both of us are creative, and it's been sort of a challenge to find that creative rhythm in quarantine, but doing well for sure. I wonder, Scott, can you tell me a little bit about how you came to choose your honors thesis topic?
Sure. So my honors thesis stems from analysis of a series of experiences I've had as a student with dyslexia. And I wanted to take this opportunity to do some personal reflection and start unpacking those experiences, because high school was incredibly difficult for me, and I sort of, looking back on it, know that I did not receive the support that I needed. And when I came to Con, I was lucky enough to get to spend an hour every week with Noel Garrett in his office, which is partially why I chose to come to Connecticut College, because when I met him, I knew that he was a person who would give me the support that I needed and help me through my academic challenges. And so I actually decided that this is a project I wanted to work on at the end of my first year, because I knew I wanted to apply to the Ammerman Center and find a way to combine the projects, which I did, in that the Ammerman portion of the project was the visual and digital interactive media design of the project, and the dance was the artistic analysis and the choreography.
Cool. That's fun.
So can you tell me how you sort of first dreamed up this project and brought it into reality?
Yeah, totally. So I had been interested in choreographic study coming in my first year at Con, and I decided to major in dance. And I also really loved art history, and I took a couple classes that first year as well, and decided that I wanted to double major. And from that point on, I was also considering, how can I integrate those two majors in a way that would be fulfilling. And then in my junior year, I went abroad to Italy. And that was just such a magical experience. And I got to learn so much about Italian Renaissance culture and some of the art that I had gotten to study in a classroom. I got to be face to face with, and it was so inspiring. And it inspired me to create a thesis that was going to be sort of a modern feminist reinterpretation of classical art. And that was a really exciting project. And I thought, okay, how do I make that dance related? And I ended up creating a dance piece that coincides with the paper portion of my thesis, which basically is a reflection of those Italian Renaissance pieces. And that was a really interesting study in choreography. Yeah, it's so funny that we have sort of similar paths from our first years onward. Scott, can you explain a little bit more about what specifically the project entails? Because I know there's a dance and writing, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
So There was always going to be a writing portion of this project, but initially I'd intended it for it to be significantly less than what it ended up becoming, because in quarantine I sort of felt like I needed to do something that I couldn't have done before. And so I ended up turning in a 96-page paper. And it's sort of split across a couple of sections, the first of which is where I analyze the neuroscience of what dyslexia is, which essentially is the brain groups neurons into what are called mini columns and connects them with chains called axons. And in the normal brain, there's a very uniform spacing and uniform length of axons, and it spreads throughout the brain. In the autistic brain, they're very closely spaced and the axons are very short. And in the dyslexic brain, the mini columns are very disparate and the length is really not uniform. And the axons that are formed tend to be rather unstable and break down and therefore have to be reformed. So the dyslexic brain specializes in the process of reforming those axons, which is often why a uniquely dyslexic quality of thinking is sort of looking at convention and reestablishing it. And that's sort of where you get like the Einsteins and the Newtons and the guy who created FedEx who just said, there's a better way, let me show you. Yeah. And then I sort of delved into a bit of my personal history with that in my education, primarily focusing on high school and the difference between high school and college for me, where I really realized in college that I thrive sort of on this project-based model of education where I sort of just accrue skills that become necessary to the project. The biggest thing for this that I did not expect to learn about was networking. I know a good deal about how computers talk to each other now, which will be very helpful in the future.
Super useful. Yeah, these days, for sure.
And then I also talk about a bunch of the dance pieces that inspire me, some of the pieces of theater that inspire me. And then I have a really long series of scientific papers about how each component of the digital media feeds into the piece, both analyzing it artistically and technologically.
That's really cool. That's so exciting. It's I really appreciate the integration between the science aspect and the dance for your work. That's really awesome.
Yeah, which is ironic because I never took a science course unless we count computer science.
We do for sure.
Yes.
That's really nice.
So can you tell me can you tell me about some of the works of art and also some of the works of dance that inspired you to make this project and that you analyze in your paper?
Yeah, totally. It's funny, we sort of had opposite paths. I went in to my thesis thinking that I wanted to get a writing sample for grad school and that it was going to be this like massive paper, and it didn't end up being that, which was kind of exciting. So from the thesis, I actually designed a museum exhibition. So to do that, there's like object lists of all of the different pieces that I've analyzed. There's over 80 in this sort of show. And then there's labels about each piece. There's short essays on some of the topics covered in the pieces, and then longer sort of wall text sections. So if you imagine yourself in a museum, you would use all of these bits of language to understand the artwork. The thesis itself is broken up into 4 sections as well. The first covers art that is visual culture that women of the Renaissance might have touched or experienced. So a lot of like bowls that are painted or boxes with insignia on them. But a lot of those objects have messaging about what it means to be a good Renaissance woman, and as you can imagine, can be pretty misogynistic. So I was analyzing those themes. My second section looks at art that was commissioned to specifically target women in the Italian Renaissance social sphere. So oftentimes powerful men would commission a piece of art to show their mistress or their wife how powerful they were. Kind of disgusting, but a super interesting genre of art and a really clear way to talk about the power imbalances of that time. The third section is about public art. During the Renaissance, most of the pieces that I chose are still available to the public today and sort of act in the same ways that they did in the 1540s, which is super interesting as well. And then the final section is contemporary art that comments on the Italian Renaissance itself. So there are actually a variety of contemporary artists that look at the Italian Renaissance and draw from the images of that time and also comment on it and maybe the more anti-feminist, misogynistic ways that those pieces enacted in that culture. So that was a really fascinating way to work through all of those things. I think the dance piece that I ended up creating is mostly inspired by that contemporary work, and sort of this idea of how are we critical of the past without losing what's important about it. I'm not advocating that we should get rid of Italian Renaissance art, but I do think that if it is to remain in the current social sphere, it needs to be critically analyzed and understood for what it is. So that's where sort of the breakdown of the thesis is for me. Yeah.
I think from this, we both sort of have this strong desire to contextualize and reclaim a narrative in our pieces.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
for me, I know I personally gravitated, as sort of someone who my main disciplines are dance, theater, and digital art. I really felt like dance gave me the tools that I wanted because it is, for one, it's corporeal, and it allows for this very direct yet abstract communication of a message, where I don't need to tell you what happened, but I get to tell you how I felt.
I completely relate to that statement. I think you and I use dance in really similar ways of this maybe quasi-narrative choreographic form of wanting to tell a story, but also wanting it to be sort of amorphous and allowing people to draw their own inspiration from it. Scott, I wonder what was your favorite part of making the thesis?
I think it's sort of the moments of realization I had when like a piece started to click for me. I spent a lot of time developing phrase work on my own before I really cast the piece. And I think one of the most important things that clicked for me was when I realized what the overarching form of the piece was going to be, where it's in two sections, each of which is a subsection. And sort of the first is this very militaristically driven piece where I'm establishing this very rigid system. And then that sort of evolves to the system continuing to exist, but it becoming scattered in nature. And sort of there's this dissonance where I introduce a soloist and sort of juxtapose them against the system. And then the second section is when I start to introduce the digital media components. And there's this breaking away from the system and this very energetic and emotional soul that just eats up space. And then sort of I reintroduce the group, but they've changed costumes to sort of signify that they are different people and representing different things, where they sort of, and that's sort of the final section, which the piece really lives in. And that was, for me, the most important section that I wanted to make. And it was really the first thing that I could imagine when I started making the piece. I also, from this release, got to appreciate the nonlinear timeline of developing this. Because of my history in theater, like, you are handed the script with a linear timeline of how that will go pretty much on the first day of rehearsal most times. And like with this process, I really got to say, walk into rehearsal with my incredible company of dancers and just say, so we're going to focus on this today. It's going to roughly fit here contextually, but we'll see. So let's start developing this together.
Yeah, for sure. I can relate to that as well, of just sort of getting to have fun in the experimentation of dance. I think you and I sort of took different approaches to that. I think at the beginning of the process, I felt like I needed my dancers there to help with that sort of choreographic building. For the piece itself, I wanted to start with representations of the female nude body in its sort of most beautiful forms, and thinking about this idea of glorification or romanticization in art, and then pull that apart towards the end of the piece. The end of the piece, the dancers use fake blood on stage and smear it across their nude bodies, and it's sort of graphic and horrifying and sexual, and to me that has a lot of questions about purity and sort of breaking down those concepts of what female beauty is and what it is to be a woman experiencing violence. So I had a lot of time with my cast to talk about that. And I think that was probably my favorite part of the process, of getting to process all of those feelings as a group and talk about these sort of really formative Renaissance pieces in a way that seemed modern and contemporary to our world as it is now. So I really enjoyed that part of the process as well.
Yeah. I think the way you invited your dancers into your process and sort of really entrusted them with that is just so wonderful, and I think is so necessary to the telling of what you're trying to do, because I mean you're looking at a generational history and especially public representations within that. And whereas for me, I really felt like I needed to unpack my personal history by myself before I really could invite dancers into that creative process. Yeah. Because I do love to feed off of the creative energy of everyone in the room. I mean, one idea is great, but like a whole smattering of ideas on top of that is almost always better.
Yeah. I think both of our methods just represent really different ways of going about it, with great similar outcomes. I think I just wanted to mention for viewers watching, Scott and I were in a double billed show prior to COVID-19, where we were going to perform our honors theses twice and do a talk back at the end. So this is sort of a little bit bittersweet for us to talk about it together, but it is really nice.
Because we are still discussing ways to perform our work, and unfortunately it will no longer be a double billed show, because that would almost be impossible to schedule.
I don't think it will happen, and a lot of our dancers are in different corners of the world, so that is a little bit sad, but it is really nice to get to talk together about the process. Mm-hmm. I myself would really like to thank my three advisors, Professor Gonzalez-Rice, Professor Henderson, and Professor Steiner, for reading the thesis and giving me such amazing feedback and criticism throughout the way, and just for my family and friends for being so supportive in the process.
And I would like to thank my primary advisor, Heidi Henderson, as well as my two readers, David Dorfman and Noel Garrett, as well as my Ammerman advisor, Rachel Boja, and sort of someone who I'll call a friend of the project, Professor Sean Hove, who I would come to him with a question and he'd either say, give me a day, or let's figure this out now. And just the general way in which the department and the general college was able to embrace these creative endeavors.
Absolutely. So much funding and support, and allowing other students to be in this work, it's upwards of 3 hours every week in the studio. And I think both of us, myself especially, are really thankful to our dancers for being so willing to jump into that kind of project.
Because we were also going to have quite a tech schedule. Yeah,
sad, but really fun. And at least we get to sort of wrap up this project in a way that feels representative of the work that we were doing. So.
Mm-hmm. And I think something that has just helped me carry this forward is the idea that it's not done, and the idea that I get to return to it at some point.
Yeah, Scott, what are your future plans?
I mean, for me, I would really love to come back and finish the work and present it at the college and just see it live in Myers the way I had first dreamed it up. But I also do know that I hold all the documentation for the process and the output. So at some point, I would like to professionally revisit this piece and present it at a dance venue and sort of put it out to the world and see what they have to say about it. And you, Maddie?
Yeah, similar boat. I think my cast is actually all seniors, and so they will all be graduating, so it might be a little bit harder to get everybody together. But there's some hope of doing the piece again next spring when we're on campus for graduation. So thinking about that, thinking about maybe doing it professionally. I think, you know, not that we're happy about COVID-19, but I think it has inspired both Scott and I to think a little bit broader about where these pieces could go. So that's really nice.
Mm-hmm. And just remember the communities that embraced us in the process. Yeah. And just really take a moment to be thankful for those.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everybody for watching.
Yes.
Nice to chat with you, Scott.
Thank you, Maddie.